Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Urban Odyssey. I hope everybody's doing well. Lately, I've found a bunch of different older books on what was going on with the Catholic Church and the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, because even though they are indeed mentioned in the file drops recently, you're not hearing anything about them from any of the mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream, and that includes, I guess, now the internet podcasters. You're not hearing about that much. And so I've got another video coming on it, but this is intended to be a video to kind of bridge the gap and to also provide some really interesting information that really I don't think anybody's talked about yet. So I've got some reading, I've got some video clips, and I'm going to present that to you. So first of all, I want to start here in what's called the South American Reducciones. This was a period of time where the Jesuits implemented early communistic-style measures in their rule over the South American peoples. So for this is a web page I will read. To understand the Hegelian character, which is this, Hegelian character of Jesuitical deception, we must consider that the doctrines of communism were designed by the Jesuits, though what were known as their reductions in Paraguay in the 17th and 18th centuries, which were a series of communes in which Jesuit priests exercised authority over the natives there. In that environment, the Jesuit order maintained control over a group of South American Guarani Indians who they educated and trained to work on their behalf, generating goods that were later sold in the markets of Europe. From a 1933 book, which I have referenced, The Revolutionary Movement by J. Fiendlater, we read the following. Quote, the Jesuits had established 20 strong mission centers called reductions, with many thousands of the Guaranis enrolled as their members. The Jesuits aimed to set up there a completely communistic system, in the sense that no individual rights were recognized and there was no private property. Everything belonged to the state and was supposed to be shared in common. But in reality, the greater part of the proceeds of goods sold was always remitted to the Camarilla, the Jesuit superiors in Europe, and the Guaranis got only bare necessities of life in return for their toil and sweat. The Jesuit leaders provided the necessary food, clothing, and health care that the Indians needed, while using them as, quote, worker bees to generate income for the order. Just as the Soviet Union would do in the 20th century, the Jesuits maintained strict control over the activities of their subjects. This is another quote. Quote, neither would they allow any Guarani to learn Spanish, nor would they tolerate an intercourse between the Guaranis and the peoples of the surrounding Spanish colonies, a prohibition maintained at the sword's point, unquote. They perfected their system of totalitarian control, all the while telling the world that their oppression over the other people was in fact utopia, a deluded fantasy maintained by some Catholic historians to this day. Perhaps worst of all is that the Jesuit did not present any form of the gospel or what might be called the Christian faith to those poor Indians. Quote, there is no evidence that any effort was ever made by the Jesuits to impart the truths properly so-called of the Christian religion. When the Jesuits were expelled, the Guaranis, having no moral or religious training to fit them to continue in the Christian faith, in a few years became as if no religious teachers had ever lived and worked among them, unquote. The ideas the Jesuits developed in Paraguay over a period of 158 years were then communicated to Karl Marx in the 19th century. Quote, for 5 years, Karl Marx went to the Jesuit school in Trier, which during the Prussian period was known as the Friedrich Wilhelm Gymnasium, unquote. Along with Karl Marx, other leading communists like Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro were also trained by the Jesuits, In fact, the former Jesuit general Pedro Arrupe once boasted, quote, "And what makes you think that we are not proud of Fidel Castro," unquote. While it is true that the popes are known for condemning communism, this on their part seems to be more political manipulation than anything else. Since Rome has repeatedly supported the principles of communist thought, the Communist Manifesto was first published in 1848, and within less than 50 years, we find the Vatican publishing declarations in agreement with it. In his book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania, which I've also used as a reference, the author John W. Robbins notes the following, quote, "One of the Roman Church state's most influential statements on economic matters is the 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum on the condition of the working classes. In this encyclical, the Roman Church state allied herself with the proletariat, which in Marxism is the great and final enemy of the capitalist order. The encyclical's Marxism is so blatant that one Roman Catholic writer declared that much of the encyclical Rerum Novarum appeared only to repeat in more orthodox language what Marx had said 10 years before. Indeed, there are paragraphs, if not pages, in the Communist Manifesto that might have been written by the Pope himself," unquote. Then, incredibly, after 100 years of various papal diatribes against communism in all its forms, the Sunday Times of London reported that, quote, "Karl Marx, who famously described religion as the opium of the people, has joined Galileo, Charles Darwin, and Oscar Wilde on the growing list of historical figures to have undergone an unlikely reappraisal by the Roman Catholic Church," unquote. So, it's very interesting. And this right here is just kind of quoting that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to play a short clip for you.
It is well known that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto in the year 1848. What is not so well known is that just 5 years earlier, in 1843, a Jesuit priest named Luigi Tapparelli published his own work in which he coined the phrase social justice. The official title of his work was Theoretical Treatise of Natural Right Based on Fact, yet he admitted that he based his ideas on a desire to revive the earlier teachings of Thomas Aquinas.
But yes, this goes back to Thomas Aquinas. And of course, Thomas is the doctor of the Roman Catholic Church. So he's the person all these Jesuits nowadays, they look back to, and they draw upon Thomas Aquinas.
Thomas Aquinas taught the doctrine of justifiable theft, the idea that it is okay to steal from your neighbor as long as you steal for a good reason. It was this concept that was cleverly interwoven by Tapparelli into his teachings on social justice.
One of the things when you read about social justice, one of the principal concepts behind social justice is redistribution. And it could be redistribution of wealth is a big part of it. And that ties in, of course, very closely with the idea of the welfare state.
Okay, now I've got another one. Now that we have established first that the Jesuits have, one, used the principles of communism, even if not formalized, and second, that they have kind of reiterated those points, Pope Leo XIII, with the encyclical Rerum Novarum. So, with that being said, let's go to the next clip.
In short, what the Peace of Westphalia is, it was a treaty. It was the treaty that settled the 30 years of war. The basic idea of the Westphalian world order, it created the modern system of international relations. And one of the most important concepts there is the idea of national sovereignty. That is, that individual nation states, that they have sovereignty, they have control over their own territory and over their own internal affairs. So you can run your country the way you want to run your country. And Rome can't interfere in that and say, well, you can't do those things.
In the aftermath of the Second 30 Years' War, it would appear that Rome and her Jesuit priests are looking to overturn the national sovereignty of all the nations of the earth. In place of the Westphalian world order, they have envisioned a new world order. Open borders might be called a tactic of the Counter-Reformation. According to Dr. Ronald Cook, the Italian word is Irredentism, a form of immigration warfare, a method for taking over a foreign country.
Not by military conflict, but by population control. So Irredentism is certainly one of the marks of Romanism today. You flood in, and that's what we've had an Ulster there. They've come up from the south of Ireland. So now the political thing is, because Paisley used to say, let's not govern by the bullet, let's govern by the ballot. Well, they're now governing by the ballot.
Okay, so controlling the population, specifically using immigration, open borders. The next clip is a shortened version of a video by Jay Dyer on Catholic charities and how today the Catholic Church is very much involved in those movements. So let's watch that one.
So every year, the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, seeks the maximum amount of funding to bring as many refugees into
a giant scam. So all of this tax money, it's not just going to bring illegals here. The Democrat operatives are also skimming the refugee money, getting a cut, and thus they make the more that come, the more money they get. And you better believe these Roman Catholic bishops, these disgusting Skittles bishops, are getting.
The Catholic Church openly supports states. Pope Leo has made several statements.
As did Francis on basically a weekly basis. Remember that? We covered that throughout the Francis pontificate. Francis was always talking about this. In fact, the United States Conference for Catholic Bishops has even said on their website that they support the migrant about Catholic charities, because it turns out Roman Catholics are trying to say, oh, well, look, I'm Catholic, but Catholic charity, well, it's not really Catholic. It's more so an NGO that's affiliated with the Democratic Party. Yeah, like the Roman Catholic Church in America. The Roman Catholic Church is an NGO of the Democratic Party, you goobers. CCB website. This is also the official Vatican policy since Vatican II via Gaudium et Spes. Remember, we did a whole podcast, a whole episode just on the Marxist Fabian Socialist positions in Vatican II's Gaudium et Spes document, which is the official Vatican II, because it's in there too. Gaudium et Spes has an entire section of all of Vatican II. It's binding. All the documents are binding. Well, they're not infallible. It doesn't matter they're infallible. It can be non-infallible and binding. You are still bound to the official teaching.
All of these are human trafficking organizations that serve to resettle migrants from outside of the country.
Again, that is so important to understand. This is large industrial scale
business, and they cloak it in. How big is the business? Billions of dollars, billions, tens of billions of dollars. During the Biden administration, the amount of money that was dumped into these, it starts to be mind-numbing, the amounts of money that are dumped on these.
Roman Catholicism is a religion where you come in and you concoct the Roman Catholicism that you want, and that's what you push and sell. You want to be a uniate, that's Roman Catholicism. You want to be a trad-cat crusader, go be that. You could make Catholicism that. You want to be a Mother Teresa praying in Hindu temples, which she did, go be that. That's what it is. That's real Roman Catholicism. So it's a never-ending shifting of the goalposts, make it into whatever you want it to be at the time. And in a way, that's its greatest strength in the sense of numbers, because it dupes so many people through that basically silly putty religion where you can turn it into whatever you want. You silly putty it into being a trad cat medieval crusader, or you silly putty it into being praying in the mosque towards Mecca. Make it whatever you want. But it's also its greatest weakness, right? That silly putty religion also means that it's incredibly weak when people start saying, hey, wait a minute, do these doctrines and dogmas have to make sense? Do they have to be consistent over time? Because once you start asking that question, it's only a matter of time before you become Orthodox or atheist, I guess, because it ends up being it's basically the first mega church, right? So before there was Joel Ovaltine, which I've been saying for a long time, you understand when you tithe to the Roman Catholic Church, you're tithing to your destruction. You might as well tithe directly to the Open Society Institute of George Soros. Just write your checks to the Rockefeller Foundation. Dear Rockefeller Foundation, thank you for destroying the country. Here's all of my money.
Okay, and so with that being said, that sets the stage for an interesting dive into some history, because it turns out that this has kind of happened before. And this is a bit of history that is ignored because the Civil War was going on, and also because a portion of this is Mexican history. And so let me play one final clip, and then we will get into the reading.
Always wanted. So, and if you don't realize what the religion of Mexico is, who's flooding our borders right now from the south, it is Catholic. In the Catholic doctrines, they have stated that we need to flood America with Catholics.
Illegal immigration is a form of social justice, according to Rome.
There was a document that was published, it was put out by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in conjunction with the Mexican Conference of Catholic Bishops. And it's called Strangers No Longer, Together on a Journey of Hope. And it was basically a position paper of the Roman Catholic Church on facilitating mass illegal immigration into the United States. And it was like, hey, y'all come on up here. That's basically what the Roman Catholic bishops and the Mexican bishops were talking about in this paper. And of course, you're seeing the actual results of that right now.
Former federal police officer Doug Thornton served 10 years with the Department of Homeland Security. Much of his time was spent on the Mexican border. We asked him to comment about the role of the Catholic Church and their involvement in illegal immigration.
You have entities like almost every Catholic church, and to include the Red Cross, that are all sponsored by the Vatican, controlled by the Vatican. They are the main culprits in moving people. It's always been a Catholic church shows up somewhere at midnight with a van when we got, a busload or two of illegals, and then they come and pick them up and they drive them away because they are helping the.
I want to underscore this point. It is infrastructure. They have probably the most real estate ever. Just, they've been around for so long. And so they are very important when it comes to infrastructure.
Government with repurposing these people, bringing them to other places. They're bringing these people across the border, and then they're funneling them all over the United States.
While the problems of illegal immigration seem to be of recent origin, most Americans are largely unaware that the plan to invade the United States through Mexico is one that dates back to the American Civil War. In his book on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Emmett McLaughlin even warned about the issue in a chapter titled Conspiracy South of the Border. One of the most controversial chapters in all of American history involves the time of the Civil War, the climax of which was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. While the events surrounding Lincoln's death are well known, It is the truth about the conspirators and what motivated them to commit their crime that some argue has been suppressed in modern times.
Okay, and so with all of that now out of the way, I'm going to take us into the book that it just showed. Yep, so the book that it mentioned, An Inquiry into the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln by Emmett McLaughlin from 1977, I believe. So we're going to specifically read through a little bit of Chapter 4, Conspiracy South of the Border. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I'm going to read through a good portion of it, and I'm going to provide all of the footnotes and stuff and encourage you guys to please check it out for yourself. It's very interesting. So, this is, as it showed, the ultimate aims of their Catholic Apostolic Majesties, that being the monarchs of Europe, the Treaty of Verona, the Holy Alliance, which was this agreement between all of the European monarchs saying we need to do something about democracy, about republicanism, or it will destroy us. And hence the Monroe Doctrine saying stay out, telling the European monarchs in question, stay out of the Americas. That's never, ever talked about, which is very surprising. So, let me resume. The Catholic Apostolic Majesties being European monarchs trying to destroy freedom. The ultimate aims of their Catholic Apostolic Majesties, including the conniving empresses and Pope Pius IX, as well as his Secretary of State, Cardinal Antonelli, were summarized by the historian A.R. Turner. 1. The occupation of Mexico for the new imperial regime. 2. Overt financial and moral and clandestine military support of the Confederacy. 3. Recognition of the Confederate States at an opportune moment. 4. Gradual reintroduction of the monarchic system of government into a divided United States. And 5. Suppression of all republican regimes and revolutions in the New World. Interesting note does say here in this book, Italians figuratively, then as many are in reality today, were trapeze artists. It mentions Garibaldi, Mazzini, Giuseppe Mazzini, who wrote to Albert Pike, and they had the exchange, the letter from Albert Pike to Mazzini with 3 world wars. Interesting. He had a lot to do with the Italian mafia, setting that up, kind of where it came from. It's a topic for a different video, though. Meanwhile, south of the border, Mexico is being torn by the Vatican, Napoleon, and Austrian conspiracy. By the mid-years of the 19th century, the Roman Catholic Church had been in Mexico, as in all other Latin American countries, for some 350 years. Catholicism was the state religion and the sole Christianizing, civilizing, educational, and moral force. So back to these reductions, however you want to say it, their precursor to communism is what that's talking about. The educational program of the church in Latin America, as elsewhere, consisted in teaching the children of the rich, proper manners, and the glory of the imperial power, mainly Spain, and of the church, while spreading a veneer of Catholic ritual over the pagan beliefs of the enslaved Indians and peons. Literacy, the ability to read and write, was neither necessary nor desirable for the masses. After 300 years, the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church in poor, sparsely populated, and underdeveloped Mexico was between $250 million and $300 million. A fabulous fortune today, and even more staggering as wealth was computed a century ago. And I'll show you the citations at the end. The church owned from 1/3 to 1/2 of all the land of the nation. The most intolerable financial oppression existed in the capital city itself, as stated by one authoritative source. 1/2 of all the property of the city of Mexico, including many millions in money, is in the hands of the Archbishop, who thereby wields a power unknown to other countries and does not disdain to assume the function of a banker. The oppression by Spain and the oppression by the Church of Rome were so intermeshed as to be indistinguishable by the people. The hierarchy supported the Spanish regime and excommunicated, through its New World Inquisition, anybody resisting the power of the state, just as it did all religious doctrinal heretics. The government, in turn, enforced church laws, and as the secular arm functioned as disciplinarian and even as executioner for the church. This was a good, just a quote that it states is a really good quote. So, the melodramatic struggle to recoup lost wealth and power would bar no holds, as witness these eloquent words of a recent historian, this being in Mexico. Quote, "There are to be cloaks and swords in plenty, a hero high-born and comely, lovely women, one of the loveliest of her age, conspiratorial whisperings, noises of battle off stage, the church's blessing, parental counsel, an emperor to pledge his honor, a throne to be won far away in the west, and at the end, madness, ruin, and death." Unquote. I will give the name of the person at the end of this when I go through the citations. The frontmen for the hierarchy amongst the laymen were a triumvirate of Mexican exiles, General Almonte, Jose Hidalgo, and their leader, Maurice Gutierrez de Estrada. This latter gentleman, always impeccably groomed and elegant in appearance, had been born and reared in Mexico to the enjoyment, not the production of wealth. Sorry, let me read that again. Had been born and reared in Mexico to the enjoyment, not the production of wealth. So, I guess he was rich. Like most of his caste, he had been educated by the Jesuits, and like his teachers, he felt and preached that Mexico should be stabilized only by, quote, absolute Catholic monarchy. Sounds so familiar. It's like somebody else, a couple people around on the internet are saying that today. Absolute and Catholic monarchy. Okay. With this outlook, the dethroned bishops found themselves in full agreement. They all set out to seek royal approval, financing, an expeditionary army, endorsement of Pope Pius IX, and a Catholic candidate for their throne. All of this they found. On the other side of the Atlantic, there sat Napoleon III with his delusions of grandeur, the Belgian King Leopold of the House of Coburg, and the Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, with a couple of unemployed brothers, each with an ambitious wife who yearned to be an empress. Some members of the House of Habsburg let their daydreams spin up so fancifully that they pictured their family controlling a vast empire comprising both continents of the New World, with one capital in Brazil ruled by Emperor Pedro II and the other under Maximilian in Mexico. Meanwhile, Prince Richard Metternich, the Austrian art conniver, kept the pot boiling as he flitted around the capitals of Europe, fomenting conspiracy against the peoples on the American continents. A devout man to carry out these plans was found in Archduke Maximilian. At first reluctant and discouraged by his brother, Maximilian was spurred on by Pope Pius IX and Napoleon III, as well as by the imperial ambitions of his beautiful wife. Aspiring to rule over millions of Catholics, he sought the support of the Pope. And so these are the letters between Maximilian and Pope Pius IX.
Most Holy Father, I find myself at a point of very great and perhaps critical importance in my life, and I cannot hope to arrive at any final decision until I have besought Your Holiness's illuminating advice. Accordingly, I am sending to Rome my secretary, Herr Scherzenlechner, who has on various occasions in the past represented me at Your Holiness's court, so that he may make known to Your Holiness the problem which confronts me. Should my own views on this matter commend themselves to Your Holiness, then I shall feel assured of the active cooperation of the Holy See, and I venture to hope that I shall receive the sacred blessing, which is so absolutely essential to me. Should Your Holiness condescend to commit your thoughts to writing, then I should not fail to consider it a fresh proof of the great goodness and favor which has hitherto been so unreservedly extended to me by Your Holiness. The Archduchess has charged me to express to Your Holiness her most humble submission, and she begs to be remembered in your prayers. We entreat you, Most Holy Father, to accept this humble assurance of our most profound veneration and respect.
To which Pope Pius IX writes back,
We have received through the medium of your secretary the letter which your Imperial and Royal Highness has addressed to us, and we gladly send you our reply. The picture of the country which the Signor Secretary has drawn is truly one which calls forth our pity, and yours is a worthy task when you call upon religion and society to busy themselves with speedy remedies. We hasten to assure you that in that unhappy land all Christian souls, and they are many, eagerly look forward to the time when peace shall again be restored, and such a peace as will enable the Church of Jesus Christ and the nation of the Mexicans to prosper. We trust, therefore, that the Lord will favor your undertaking with his blessing, and we earnestly bid you and your illustrious Archduchess to be of good heart.
all right, so these are their exchanges. Sitting on his ecclesiastical throne in Rome, Pope Pius IX actively participated in the plot to establish a monarchy on American soil. Quote, if it should be possible to reestablish a monarchical system in Mexico, the cause of religion and of order in that country would be immensely strengthened. Although the papal Secretary of State, Cardinal Antonelli, insisted that the invasion of Mexico give the semblance of a response to the despairing appeal of the Mexican people for intervention to reestablish law and order, the Vatican itself was unwilling to risk an actual referendum of the people. Antonelli told the Austrian ambassador, Baron Bach, that the Pope was worried, quote, concerning the danger contained in the idea of having recourse to a vote of the population to sanction the accession of the future monarch, unquote. The Pope was no mere bystander in the game. His was always the deciding voice. So, now we have another exchange.
If the efforts of the monarchical party succeed, I shall owe it in great part to the goodness, encouragement, and cooperation of Your Holiness, and before we leave to take up the post destined me by the divine will, the Archduchess and myself will not fail to come to Rome, and to place at Your Holiness' feet our filial veneration and our infinite gratitude.
To which I'm now reading from the text. While Abraham Lincoln was using every tactic and device to sustain the frail, fledgling growth of democracy, the Pope was giving his full blessing, approval, and endorsement to the crushing of a democratic nation that lay at the moment on the, quote, soft underbelly of the United States. So the Pope does write back and answers the Archduke saying the following.
Your Imperial Highness will conceive with what pleasure I shall embrace you here in Rome and pronounce upon you and upon your august Archduchess my full blessing, comforting you both before you betake yourselves to that task to which it seems that God has ordained you.
So the ambitions of their imperial Catholic apostolic majesties and of Pope Pius IX did not stop at the Mexican border. There is good historical evidence to indicate that the combined forces of the Roman Church and the authoritarian states in Europe dreamed of taking over the entire Western Hemisphere, including the United States. The royal houses already had one of their relatives on the throne of Brazil. Now they are going to foist a Habsburg Maximilian on Mexico. They strongly hoped that the Confederacy would win the Civil War in America. After the initial victories of Robert E. Lee, especially at the Battle of Bull Run, European royalty and Vatican authorities were confident of a Southern victory. They considered the Union in a state of dissolution. The United States could easily be overrun, they calculated, and they envisaged, I don't know how to say that, envisaged a Catholic empire that would spread north from Central and Southern America through the remnants of the United States, right up to the French Catholics in Canada. Uh-oh, what's that sound like, guys? Doesn't that sound like exactly what's going on right now? So, with that being said, let's see. Sitting on one of the oppressing and imperialist thrones of Europe was the father-in-law of Maximilian, King Leopold of Belgium, who encouraged the fledgling emperor by saying, "Once you are firmly established in Mexico, it is probable that a great part of America will place itself under your rule." So, to paraphrase a bit, what happened was that the diplomats exchanging between seemingly, Secretary of State William H. Seward wrote to the United States minister at Rome, so they're exchanging between their courts. "Sir, this department has been informed by a gentleman of high standing in Canada that there is a person in Montreal who has in his possession a recognition of the so-called Southern Confederacy by the Pope, written on parchment. Though this statement is incredible in itself and improbable from circumstances attending it, it is still deemed worthy of a categorical inquiry of Cardinal Antonelli, the Secretary of State for the Vatican. This you will consequently make, but in a way not to allow an impression that the statement is believed. If, however, contrary to any reasonable expectation, the statement should be confirmed by the Cardinal's answer, you will express the regret of this government at this proceeding, which must compel a suspension, at least, of diplomatic intercourse between the two governments," which did happen. Wasn't restored until under the Reagan administration. "To this end, you will request your passport and retire to Switzerland," of course, Switzerland, "or such other quarter as you may think proper, and will there await further instructions of the department." The American minister to Rome, Rufus King, replied that Cardinal Antonelli denied the charge. The cardinal admitted that Pope Pius IX had written to Jefferson Davis, but stated that the correspondence had been initiated by the Confederate leader. A short time later, November 26th of 1874, King notified Seward that Jefferson Davis had again written to the Pope, thanking the Holy Father for his letter of last year, expressing the satisfaction which that letter had given to the Southern people, and remarking upon the fact that the Pope was the only potentate in Europe who had uttered a word of sympathy for the Confederates in the day of their distress. That's true. The Pope was pretty much the only European royal, quote unquote, to support the Confederacy, which is very interesting. The fact that Pope Pius IX was so fully involved in this imperial scheme is very clearly evident, not only from his fatherly counseling as the Mexican conspiracy was formed, but also from his angry outburst when the plan began to backfire. Maximilian was a devout son of the church, but he was also a politician and at heart a humanitarian. When the French forces placed him on the ground in Mexico City in June 1863, he realized that he could not turn back the moving finger of Mexican history, annul the law of reform of 1857, or restore half of the Mexican nation to the priests and the bishops who had expropriated it from the people, and then lost it in the struggle led by Juarez. The hierarchy screamed foul and protested mightily that they had been betrayed by their own protege. Pope Pius IX wrote an indignant letter of disappointment to Maximilian on October 18, 1864.
Sir, when, in the month of April last, before assuming the reins of the new Empire of Mexico, your Majesty arrived in this capital in order to worship at the tombs of the holy apostles and to receive our apostolic benediction, we informed you of the deep sorrow which filled our soul by reason of the lamentable state into which the social disorders during these last years have reduced all that concerns religion in the Mexican nation. Before that time, and more than once, we had made known our complaints in public and solemn acts, protesting against the iniquitous law called the Law of Reform, which attacked the most inviolable rights of the Church and outraged the authority of its pastors, against the seizure of the ecclesiastical property and the dissipation of the sacred patrimony, against the unjust suppression of the religious orders, against the false maxims that attack the sanctity of the Catholic religion, and, in fine, against many other transgressions committed not only to the prejudice of sacred persons, but also of the pastoral priesthood and discipline of the Church. The Mexican nation also learned with indescribable pleasure of your Majesty's accession to the throne, called to it by the unanimous desire of a people who, up to that time, had been constrained to groan beneath the yoke of an anarchical government, and to lament over the ruins and disasters of the Catholic religion, their chief pride at all times and insufficient foundation of their prosperity. Under such happy auspices, we have been waiting day by day the acts of the new empire. Your Majesty will undoubtedly perceive that if the Church continues to be controlled in the exercise of her sacred rights, if the laws which forbid her to acquire and possess property are not repealed, if the price of the Church property and convents is still at the hands of its unlawful purchasers, if sacred buildings are not allowed to reassume their distinctive uses, if the religious orders are not allowed to live in community, if the nuns are obliged to beg for their food and forced to occupy miserable and insufficient edifices, if the newspapers are permitted to insult pastors with impunity and to assail the doctrines of the Catholic Church, if this state of things is to continue, then perhaps the same evils will certainly continue to follow, and the scandal to the faithful and the wrongs to religion will become greater than ever before. Your Majesty is well aware that in order effectively to repair the evils occasioned by the Revolution, and to bring back as soon as possible happy days for the Church, the Catholic religion must, above all things, continue to be the glory and every mainstay of the Mexican nation, to the exclusion of every other dissenting worship, that their bishops must be perfectly free in the exercise of their pastoral ministry, that the religious orders should be re-established or reorganized conformably with the instructions and powers which we have given, that the patrimony of the Church and the rights which attach to it may be maintained and protected, that no person may obtain the faculty of teaching and publishing false and subversive tenets. That instruction, whether public or private, should be directed and watched over by the ecclesiastical authority, and that, in short, the chains may be broken which up to the present time have held the Church in a state of dependence and subject to the arbitrary rule of the civil government. If the religious edifice should be re-established on such basis, and we will not doubt that such will be the case, Your Majesty will satisfy one of the greatest requirements and one of the most lively aspirations of a people so religious as that of Mexico. Your Majesty will calm our anxieties and those of the illustrious episcopacy of that country. You will open the way to the education of a learned and zealous clergy, as well as give a striking reform example to your subjects. And besides, you will give a striking example to the other governments in the republics of America, in which similar very lamentable vicissitudes have tried to consolidate the church own. And lastly, you will labor effectively to consolidate your own imperial throne, to the glory and prosperity of your imperial family.
So, yeah, thus, at a moment when Abraham Lincoln was battling for freedom and continued liberty north of the Mexican border, the Pope could still implore the head of the neighboring state that, quote, the Catholic religion must, above all things, continue to be the glory and mainstay of the Mexican nation, to the exclusion of every other dissenting worship. At a moment when, according to some American Catholic historians, the Church was emerging from the dark period known as the Age of Faith, the Pope could still demand that public instruction be, quote, watched over by the ecclesiastical authority. It is difficult to understand how Archbishop Hughes of New York could reconcile his boasted loyalty to Lincoln and the cause of the North with his oath of allegiance to the Pope, who was condemning the very principles that Lincoln was fighting for, saying how is the clergy in New York saying, oh, you know, we're supporting the Union, we support Lincoln, but at the same time, the Pope is saying that behind the scenes. So who is he loyal to? That's the question being posed here. It's kind of the question that we don't have full answers to, because it's a lot of playing both sides. Like the rest of America, the Catholic communities were torn asunder by divided loyalties, North against South, brother against brother. In 1862, there were 46 dioceses, 4 apostolic vicariates, which are territories not developed sufficiently to have a bishop, all with 3 to 4 million Catholics, some in the Union, some in the Confederacy. American soldiers, whether in blue or in gray, no doubt felt that they were fighting for freedom, including freedom of worship. At the same time, however, the Catholics were paying homage to their spiritual ruler, who was actively involved in a war to destroy that freedom in the land of their southern neighbors. Back in Italy, where the people were struggling for national unity and independence, the Jesuits were emerging as the objects of deep popular hatred. The Italian people looked upon the Jesuits as connivers against the freedom of Italy from papal rule. The hand of the Jesuits in the scheming against Lincoln's cause, as well as against that of the Italian people, was becoming increasingly apparent to many leaders. On June 26, 1865, when the body of Lincoln had but recently turned cold in the grave to which he had been sent by assassin, Rufus King reported to Surratt that negotiations between Pope Pius and Victor Emmanuel were being torpedoed and were making slow progress, purposefully slow, I fancy. The Jesuits are all opposed to it, as they are and were, with few exceptions, to the cause of the American Union. The Jesuits, Father Garnet, Gerard, and Greenway, were involved even in the gunpowder plot of 1605, which was planned to blow up Parliament and destroy British royalty. Could the antipathy of the Jesuit leaders in Rome have been reflected in Washington, in the Jesuit Georgetown College, now Georgetown University? Could this explain the fact that the bulk of Georgetown's alumni joined the armies of the South? Could this illuminate the fact that several of Georgetown's students were involved in the actual conspiracy to kill Abraham Lincoln, that a priest was the confessor of Mary Surratt, who was hanged for her complicity in the assassination, that Jesuits and their students from Georgetown were constantly in the courtroom during the trial of John Surratt, that Surratt himself, just before his death and after his participation in the conspiracy, was well recognized, was a teacher of American children in a parochial school. That's an interesting subject for another video, but I'm going to play this short clip and we will wrap everything up.
But what we're going to look at is Margaret Surratt. Okay, so Margaret Surratt is not Mary of the Lincoln times, but she is the first common denominator. Okay, the person that we want to know about for the purposes of this is this man right here. His name is Jacques Surratt. Okay, very French. He's born in France, immigrated here to Prince George, Maryland. So Jacques Surratt, his first name was Joseph. I think that part's a clerical error. That kind of stuff did happen, where somebody may have written Joseph, but it looked like Jacques, and then they were Jacques Surratt from there forward. By the way, you can spell Surratt with every fucking vowel, and it's still correct. It's probably the only last name I've seen that. So if you scroll down through his kids, his youngest son. Okay, so JD's line is related to Alan Surratt. Or I'm sorry, not Alan, Samuel Surratt. The line for the co-conspirators is Joseph Surratt. So basically, the common person is Jacques Surratt. So if you follow Joseph's line down, that's when you get to the co-conspirators for Lincoln. If you follow Samuel down, that's where you get to J.D. Vance. So here's Joseph's kids. Okay, so if you look up the co-conspirators, you will find that Alphonsus Surratt is the father of John Surratt, who married Mary Jenkins. Mary Jenkins and her son John, they're all named John. It's really annoying. Her son John and Mary both conspired with John Wilkes Booth to kill President Lincoln.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff there. This is from that book at the very beginning, a rendering of Surratt as a papal zouave, which is like a, I guess like a part of the Swiss Guard. But see, this is a better picture of him. And John Surratt, as the book says, he lived until like the 1920s. He was he was let off. I can't remember what the word is. I'm drawing a blank on it. He was basically seemingly given a free pass. He was acquitted. That's what I'm looking for. Surratt was acquitted when he was brought. They found him working as a Swiss guard in Rome after his mother had smuggled him out of the country. So she was hanged, Mary Surratt. And they find him and bring him back. And, you know, obviously this does cause the United States to end diplomatic relations with the Vatican. It does say here on the Wikipedia page, which you know how accurate that is, due to these rumors, the United States broke off diplomatic relations with the Holy See. It does mention the whole story of Surratt right here. And then see if I can find the archive. Yep, 84. January 11th, 1984, the Vatican and the U.S. to establish diplomatic relations. And it's very interesting. They don't mention much as to why that happened, what the evidence was, and very interesting. And then for those of you who would just like to see the footnotes and stuff, they're at like the end of the book, but I took some screenshots of them. The quote from the very beginning that I said I liked, the author, Daniel Dawson, The Mexican Adventures, the name of the book. Alrighty, guys. I appreciate you watching this, listening to it. Let me know what you guys think. Hit the like button, subscribe button, and I will have a little bit more on this subject, but this video is needed to kind of set the stage, and nobody's really talked about this, so I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.